Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Monday Night Live Stream. Welcome tonight. Another Monday Night Live Stream, another topic, another interesting thing we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, we've kind of come full circle. When I first started these, the whole idea was to eventually get to the point to where we could use these Monday Night Lives to be a bit more like detailed and kind of deep dive into some of the more controversial memes or some of the memes that maybe brought up a little bit more of the conversation that maybe we could go into a little bit more. And so tonight we're actually doing that. Every other night it's been Twitter or it's been interviews, and we'll have some of that give or take as we kind of go through everything. But tonight is going to be about one of the memes we put up about pronouns and pronouns in the bio, which apparently, hey Matt, who knew? Divisive, a divisive thing in our current.
You know, what is it nowadays?
So what I want to do, guys, in case you didn't see it, because I know this is weird where everybody comes from. Some people are only on YouTube. Some people come over from Instagram. In case you missed the meme, I am going to throw that up really quick. So here's the meme here. It's that little old granny meme where she says, I remember when Christians didn't put pronouns in their bio. And then, her granddaughter goes, sure, Grandma, let's get you back to bed. As if, Grandma, that's silly. People always did that. Now
I'm out of here, Michael. See ya.
You're gone already. Okay, so I'm gonna...
you hateful bigot.
Well, we did lose a few people. Big surprise there. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna read the description to you real quick, kind of so you kind of have the idea of what's going on, or at least what I said in the original. Description, so you kind of have a context of this discussion tonight and the importance, I think. I mean, just so everybody's super clear, this is my meme, this is my description, so just so we're super clear, and we'll kind of have a discussion off of it, right? So the description was, as believers, we must be aware of the messages that our actions send. Putting pronouns in your bio seems like a small thing. It may even seem somewhat loving or helpful. However, doing so is neither. I'm going to have to get closer because I can't see. My eyes are bad. First, it communicates a message of support for a life lived in rebellion to God and his creation. Secondly, what may seem loving is not. Supporting and encouraging someone in their sin is destructive. It only encourages them to continue in their rebellion. As Christ followers, we are called to act toward others as Christ has acted toward us. We are to show grace, mercy, and kindness, but in ways that are faithful to what God has decreed. Let us be the hands and feet of Jesus in the lives of those around us, demonstrating what new life in Christ produces, being honest about our own sin and the work that is being done in us, pointing to the new life that can only be found in him being Christ, clearly. So the idea... And the reason I think this is an important issue because, and Matt, I think is going to tell his story here in a minute as far as like his interaction where he had to deal with this sort of on a daily basis. And I know each of us, depending on where you are, probably in the country, depending on your job or kind of where you're going to college, this is something that's coming up a lot more for believers. I've actually heard quite a few places in their work that they're being asked to put their pronouns in their emails. Now, the reason I think, so just to kind of give you where I'm jumping off of, this is a really interesting sort of phenomenon to me. So not necessarily this meme. There's a tweet I tweeted. I mean, it was months back now. But the reason that this is such I think something that Christians have to address is because if you type in Google or YouTube pronouns in the bio, what's going to come up is going to be not Christian sources or anything like that. It's just going to be people almost always from the trans community that are going to be stating why one would want to put pronouns in the bio. And every time, with the exception of maybe a few that I've seen as far as the videos, it always comes down to them saying that putting pronouns in your bio is a way to show like allyship or affirmation, sort of a camaraderie with them, because when you're doing it, it takes the stigma away from them doing it. So it's really, this is very much a support, very much an allyship. And so when I said in the description, for example, I think it is if a Christian does this. Now, a lot of people, real quick to clarify, thought that I was saying if you do this, it is a sin and therefore you shouldn't do that. And I hope clarifying in the description there, I never said that. I just said that it's one of those things where you have to be careful what you do, because if someone takes that as you affirming them when you do that, you have to deal with that in some sort of way, form, or fashion. Because even if that's not your intent in doing that, that's how it's being taken. And therefore there is this sort of understanding that when I put pronouns in my bio, I am supporting or condoning what you're doing. And I, as a Christian, I just simply do not think that is something that we should do. Now, we can talk a little bit around sort of the more day-to-day interactions and something like that. But Matt, if you want to kind of talk to us first, because I think your situation speaks to this a lot more than most people's, or the majority maybe at this point. Do you want to kind of talk about, Princeton and your whole situation when you were there?
Yeah. So throughout my earlier years of education, went to a small public school way back in the day before any of this was particularly mainstream. Homeschooled a few years. Went to a Christian liberal arts college. Went to a conservative seminary, and then whenever I decided to go into postgraduate studies, my academic advisor, mentor, who now looking back, I can see is very sadistic, because he says, "Hey, let's send you to Princeton," because that's where he also got his same. He did his postgraduate work, and so he has just connections from back in the day. And so he said, let's get you in, let's get you up there for the 1 year postgraduate masters of theology. So I was like, oh yeah, let's do it. Not fully anticipating what my experience would be once I got there, coming from someone who lives not necessarily in the deep South. I live in Kentucky and in Appalachia, which is essentially a part of the South. So coming from a conservative Southern area and then getting put into mainstream, New England, very liberal, progressive groups. And one of the first things that hit me in that experience was that anytime that we spoke, and specifically if we were in a new class, in a new group, if we broke out into like different breakout sessions, if it was a larger class and then we had to like split up within that class and do rotations, anytime we introduced ourselves, we always had to state our name and then of course our preferred pronouns. Now I was at the seminary at Princeton, and so I was there to get the postgraduate master's in New Testament studies. Granted, most of the people at the seminary were there because of ordination purposes and getting masters of divinity and things like that. And so what surprised me most is that a good percentage, if not even half or more, of those who were there getting their degrees in divinity, going through the ordination process, were from the LGBTQ community. Several of them that I remember having classes with and conversations and friends in school and studies from the transgender community. Most of them from the PCUSA, and I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but the Evangelical Lutheran Church, ECL, something of that nature. And so in this kind of community, specifically in a seminary setting, this was something that was required on a consistent basis. And so in that situation, it was required of me. And so when I spoke, I would say, "Hey, my name is Matt Van Orstron. Pronouns are he, him, his." And so I would capitulate in that aspect, because I'm referencing my own pronouns, just like I would in any other situation, because I don't care, if anybody calls me whatever, just you can call me anything you'd like. Just don't call me late for dinner. I'm a big guy. Gotta have the dinner. But everybody else is throwing out these pronouns. Most people would offer pronouns that appeared fairly consistent with what you would just assume them to be based on their immediate physical appearance. There were some of those who you could, I don't mean this in a derogatory or insultive way, but people who even before offering pronouns, you could just tell that they were from the transgender community. And so sometimes you would have someone who was a man. Had men who had facial hair, but then would also wear makeup and earrings and wear blouses and so on and so forth. Some of them would give their preferred pronouns as he, him, his, even though they were men. I don't know if it's transgender, cross dressers, whatever it was. Others, you would have the pronouns for desiring pronouns of the feminine gender, and also vice versa with females, transgender females. And then you would have, we'll say, you would have some that weren't transgender that preferred the pronouns they, them. And then you had some who I think I heard maybe once I heard the Z pronouns, Z, them, Z's, zers. I think I only heard Z, them, ziz once. And I had some classmates who, and this just made it all the more confusing, at least for those who followed suit. I'll get to the gist of the way I handled it. Which I hope was the right way. I feel pretty confident in what I did. But this person would sometimes say, I don't know what I want to be called. Sometimes I feel like a he, sometimes I feel like a her, and even that person who was very congenial, they said just call me whatever you want. And so at least there was that. So in the midst of all of this extreme confusion, and I think most of the time it has to be confusing even for those who are trying to follow suit. And I understand the reasoning behind that in the community, that they're like, well, this is why we need to do it. That way it takes away some of the confusion. But the way that I handled it was that I simply did not use pronouns. Intentionally avoided them. So regardless of whether the person was apparently, not apparently transgender, whether or not they were apparently using pronouns that did not naturally equate their apparent or identified gender, whatever it was, I simply addressed them by their name. I would say, Michael has Michael's, so on and so forth. Instead of he has his, or instead of give this to him, it would be hey, give this to Michael. And that's the way that I did it. I never ran into any problems. The only other problem that I did avoid has nothing to do with pronouns, but it had to do with race. And they try to divide us up into small groups where only BIPOCs, Black, Indigenous, people of color could be in these groups, and only white people could be in these groups. And thankfully, a very large portion of the student body was like, we're not doing this. we're not going to separate, because they were essentially trying to force segregation as a good thing for the sake of protecting BIPOCs. Anyway, that's a totally different
totally different conversation we can get into.
What I did there was I refused to go. I said, if they don't let me graduate for not going, so be it. And so I avoided it, and no plagues fell upon my head. So I avoided that. But sort of in the same sense, I also avoided the pronouns. I used the pronouns in a situation where it was necessary in reference to me, that I identified myself in that way. And then in other instances where I did not have to use pronouns, I simply refer to them by name. Basically, what you said that you've done at work. You just refer to everybody as name.
Yeah, and that's what we have a couple comments over here. We're not going to bring it on the screen, but that's basically what they're saying is that they're running into it at work. There's something that they're, I think this is one of the things, just in all actuality, especially if you're in a university setting or in a probably a larger company, especially if you're higher up in management, this is something you're not going to be able to avoid. So one of the things, the reason we're talking about it tonight, the reason the meme was even made, is that as Christians, I think we have to think about it, right? So where are you going to land, right? Is it going to be a situation where you, like me and Matt were talking beforehand, it's really just you tell me your name and I'm just going to call you your name. That's what I'm going to do. This is the sort of the middle of the road compromise part of it, because, whatever you tell me your name is, I'm going to go with it. And then it is like this actively, like you said, and it's something you really have to put a lot more conscious thought into, which is this purposefully using someone's name. Now, I have had conversations with people. I don't know if you ran into this at all, Matt, but where it's sort of clearly most people don't necessarily talk like that with the name all the time, right? So then it's like, oh, are you avoiding this? And it is a conversation where you have to go, yeah, I am. I'm just going to be honest with you. I am avoiding using pronoun. Like if you've noticed it, if you're calling me out on it, I'm just going to be honest with you. This is where I stand on it. This is my viewpoint on it. And that's why I'm intentionally using this. Now, I think at least, and again, not everybody's situation is going to be the same, but in those cases, it's actually given me an opportunity to explain why. Now, again, this hasn't happened. This happened less than a handful of times. Okay. But when it has, at least I've been able to explain, like in a whole lot of other situations, hey, I'm a Christian. I follow Jesus. This is why I am doing this or not doing this thing, right? What I think is actually beneficial in that situation is now I'm cognitive of the fact, just like they are, that now I follow Jesus. They know that. I mean, more so than maybe even before, like we were already a witness for Christ in wherever you're at, but now it's out there in front, right? And it's one of those opportunities that you have to say, because I think people expect a certain sort of reaction from Christians on this topic or a variety of other topics. And now you have an opportunity, even though, I mean, it was placed in front of you, but because of this conversation, to be able to live out, like I said in that comment section, or in that description on the meme, you now have more so than you did before, this opportunity to be the hands and feet of Christ in front of people, demonstrating that, like, yeah, I don't agree with with what you are doing or what you believe, but I'm not going to treat you any different than I did before, or as I treat anybody else around here. And I think that's one of the things that is helpful when those conversations do come up, because I think sometimes, and I don't know, maybe you noticed this, maybe you didn't, I think sometimes we as believers try to avoid this as much as possible. Like, just be like, I'm going to hide behind how many ever walls I need to hide behind so I just don't have to deal with this. And I think, honestly, it's coming to the point where you're not going to be able to do that for very much longer. And you are going to have to come up to the point, say, am I okay with working at a company that forces me to do this? If you're not, you're going to have to find something. Or if I do have to have this job, where's the line for me then, right? Is it me putting my pronouns in my email? Is it me putting my pronouns in, my LinkedIn account, which apparently is a fairly kind of common thing now? And how far are you willing to go in that regard? Now, I think a lot of people would say, Christians are going to be seen as bigots or transphobic or whatever in this regard. But I think maybe I'm just seeing it through rose-colored glasses. I think it's going to give Christians, honestly, an opportunity to actually live out our faith more, to where you're going to get the opportunity to interact with people that are going to expect you to treat them a certain way. And now you're going to be in the workplace, be able to, not that it'll work out everybody this way, but you'll be able to actually show what the love of Christ looks like. Now they're not going to agree with you. I'll be honest with you, all the transgender people, all the LGBTQ people I know, it's not like, anybody's repented or fallen on the ground or anything like that and had some sort of salvific moment. But the idea is that my hope is in my interactions is that they see that, okay, this expectation of what I had from this guy is not what I'm getting, right? So I'm not being treated any different. I'm not, being talked about behind, my back or whatever. And in some cases, just because of the area I live in, you're actually able to be the person that stands up and says, hey, don't talk about them like that because it's disrespectful. Just because, I mean, some of the people, it might be the same place kind of where you're at. There are people that aren't Christians that, will still be like, say derogatory things essentially that just aren't helpful. And you're, as the Christian, are able to be like, hey, that's not necessary. That's not helpful. Much like you probably would if somebody was, talking about women at work that you work with, and you step in and say, don't say those sort of things. It's the same sort of conversations. So when it comes for me, right, I think my position is pretty clear in the meme that in the case of it's this, you're willingly doing this. Like you're just saying, hey, I'm going to do this. I think at that point, and I from your experience, I think I'd like sort of your sort of feedback on this, but from my point of view, I think if I am willingly putting sort of that sort of in my Facebook or my Instagram or my Twitter, that's sending a message like a step above what my work would require of me. And because of what that community or what that group of people understands that to be, as a Christian, I don't see there's any way around it saying, well, I'm just trying to build a bridge. And we'll get into some of those comments because there are some comments that came in like that. But before we get into that, what's your kind of take on that, Matt?
Yeah. So if I can, I'm going to try to draw as much of an analogy between this situation and the situation with idol meat in Corinth. Not entirely analogous, but all analogies have a certain amount of similarity.
Breaking point,
yeah. So with the situation in Corinth, very, very tricky. You have Jews in Corinth who have never eaten meat that has been sacrificed to an idol. Part of that is primarily because it just wouldn't be a kosher meat anyways. But even aside from that, it would violate their conscience and the law. And then you have them turning to Christ. And in the first few centuries, the majority of the Jewish Christian community still stuck to the traditions of their fathers, not as a salvific issue, not even necessarily as a spiritual obedience issue, but just this is our culture, and so this is what we do. So you have that group in Corinth. Then you have the group of Gentile converts who have spent their entire lives eating meat sacrificed to idols, because in ancient Greco-Roman culture there was no such thing as the secular. Everybody was religious in the ancient Greco-Roman world. In fact, it was the Christians who were identified as the atheists in Greco-Roman society, because they rejected all gods but one. They refused to identify Yahweh with Jupiter or Zeus. So you have these Gentiles who feel absolutely nothing wrong with eating meat that has been sacrificed to idols. They say, hey, idols aren't actual gods. They don't exist. There's nothing that's changed in the meat. It's fine to do this. And then you also had the Gentile converts who Paul describes them as having a more delicate conscience. We'll say that, maybe a more strict conscience. And they said, no, because Christ has saved us, we're not going to eat this meat because we feel like it's been sacrificed to idols. And so we're going to do what our Jewish brothers and sisters have been doing all along. And so you have this come to a head where they are about to split over this issue. And so Paul writes them in his epistles. He basically says that for those who do feel that it is wrong, that they should absolutely abstain from it, because whatever is not of faith is sin. And then for those who feel like that there's nothing wrong with it, you can do it in your house secretly. Don't go to those temple courts and eat the meat there, because some of them were doing that. And he said, don't go to those temple courts in public, because this is what Paul says. This is what will happen. If you go out into public and go into the court surrounding these pagan temples where they are selling the meat and having basically outdoor restaurants where you can go and sit down, someone with a weaker conscience who is a believer comes along and sees you eating at that place, at that pagan temple, and because of their view and understanding of the situation, Paul says you're going to cause them to stumble in one of two ways. Either they are going to get extremely upset at you and become judgmental, or you're going to cause them to stumble in their own conscience and say, oh, well, okay, even though I feel like that it's wrong, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And then you could start them down a slippery slope to where it's going to end in disaster anyways. So he says, if you get, and so he says, don't eat in public for those who have that conscientious ability and freedom in Christ. But then he says those who are weak, those who have the more delicate conscience. I don't really like using the English word weaker conscience. We'll just say a more delicate conscience or a stricter conscience. He says if you go to someone else's house, eat their meat in ignorance, because it's okay as long as you don't know. But once you ask and find out what it is, you're going to have to refrain, because then that would violate your conscience. So he just says, do it in ignorance. Don't make a big deal about it. Just step back from the situation.
He enacts a don't ask, don't tell policy is what he does.
Essentially, yes. And so it's not entirely analogous, but I think that there are bits and pieces that we can pull from Paul's advice here in this situation to apply to this current situation. The first one that comes to mind has to do with the caption in the meme. Christians need to ask themselves, what is the end goal? What is the ultimate purpose? What is the potential effects of us just freely and willingly and voluntarily putting the pronouns in our bios? Now, of course, there are going to be those who are going to say, oh, this is the loving thing to do. This is a thing that is going to begin to draw them in, so on and so forth. That it may be a nice gesture in thought, but I really question the validity of that in practice. I don't know. I don't have any stats to back that up. That's just my own.
I just know from personal interactions, if I were to do that, the people I know online would automatically assume that I was now affirming of what they were doing. So I mean, in a very one-on-one personal situation, that, and again, that is going to vary by everyone's relationship, but I know the people I know would automatically take that as an affirming position in that position. So I think it's a much more one-on-one relationship than a broad internet idea. I think even in a broad internet idea, that would be a lot more true than even in a one-on-one relationship where people would know who you are. But
right,
yeah, it's a stretch for me.
yeah, and that it's sort of the same situation with eating in the public temple courts of outside the pagan temples, where you're going to call somebody, you're going to give somebody the wrong idea, and so you have to ask yourself, is this truly the loving way, and is this any kind of effective way, or is this something that is going to do nothing but undermine my own convictions and instead cause me to inadvertently sin against my own conscience by blindly offering my direct support of those things. And so I'm like I said, take all of that, take things from that as you will. But I do think that's a little bit of a starting defense as to why we shouldn't voluntarily do those things, because is there any real effect, and is the very little effect that it is going to have, is that going to be counterproductive to the larger picture of what we do and stand for as Christians?
Well, and on that loving point, I do want to bring up a comment. Now, guys, just so I'm super clear here, I don't think anybody that watches this or rewatches this is going to go troll anybody or be a bully to them. But just let me say this right now: don't do that. Don't be that person. So I'm going to put these up here. I didn't black anything out because you could easily go to this meme and find these comments. So it'd be a waste of time to do that. But when I put these up here, don't go find these people and be idiots to them. Now on the love one, though, on that whole love aspect, I think this is an important one. So right here, he said it doesn't communicate a message of rebellion to God. So what he's saying is putting pronouns in your bio does not communicate a message of rebellion to God. Now, again, that's still a misunderstanding, I think, a bit to what I was saying. The idea is that when you're affirming them, you're affirming the rebellion to God. That's the point. But let's get past that point because it goes on to something more important, I think, in a conversation here. It communicates that trans people are seen and loved by the Christian community. Now, on that love part, I think this is when we were looking through this meme, and I tried to kind of get on the front side of it when we talked about the description, but I think there's a lot of people, and again, this is going to vary, I think, probably on, your sanctification, how long you've been a Christian, the community that you're in, all of that's discipling into you. But one of the things that I think is right in that meme is that in that comment, is that we do have to consider, okay, what are we doing? Are we being blatantly hateful to someone, or are we being faithful to the gospel in regards to how we act toward them? Right. So I think one of the conversations, especially when we have this conversation, because it's such a hot button thing. I mean, we could literally put anything in here and it would be so less tense, but we could still give the same advice. But the idea is that when you're acting lovingly toward anybody in sin, the idea is that you can still be the hands and feet of Jesus. So I tell this story a lot. One of the people I know that is trans, they understand me and my wife's position and some mutual friends' positions on it. But they also know, and this is where I think Christians there's this ground that we have to really have this opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus in this situation, while also maintaining what the scripture says about man being man and woman being woman. That this person knows that if they need a ride, if they need groceries, there's a whole lot going on in their life, like a lot, and they need a lot of assistance in certain times. But they know that if they need something, they can call us or our mutual friends and, dude, I'm gonna go get you a ride, or somebody, somebody's gonna. The idea being like that people know that even though you disagree with them, that there is still this love there and that they can call on you. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many people in these different communities, you guys that are watching, but oftentimes they don't have a lot of people that are reliable, that they can call upon to help them in situations. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, it's very volatile situations anyway, with relationships and family, and there's not people. So I think there is an opportunity for Christians to do this hands and feet while still staying faithful to the gospel. It's not I do this and therefore it proves my love to you, or I don't do this and it proves that I don't love you. Rather, it is saying that my actions should speak louder than everything else towards you about Jesus and my belief system. So regardless, and I've said this in other times when I've talked to people, like if your hill that you're going to die on is if I have this in my bio or something, you're dying on the wrong hill. Like the idea is that, what are our actions toward people that's going to show the hands and feet of Jesus, that love part. And I think in all these comments we're going to look at, or most of them, it talks about this Christian showing love. I think there's this, I love bouncing ideas off of you. And so that's why I'm glad that you're always on here on Mondays. But so what's your take on that? Why do you think some people default to, if I don't do this, then it communicates that I don't love them, even though there's clearly other ways to show that we love them? Why do you think people default there?
I think it's a cop-out that is ultimately based in a lazy unwillingness to live out love in other more practical, more difficult ways. Because you put those pronouns in the bio and boom, you've checked a box. Oh, I'm now supportive and affirming of these people, and so there's nothing else that I can do or that I need to do. So I've done my duty. My duty. I have, and it's just like this tiny thing that really doesn't make any kind of impact or difference. And people on the internet don't see, as you said, those times in the lives of interactions between Christians and people who are going through these identity crises or transitions or situations, whatever you want to call it, doing the groundwork. I guarantee you that if a transgender person were going hungry because they didn't have money to buy enough groceries, they would. I mean, I can almost like 99% guarantee this, just because of basic human needs and nature. A person who is going hungry would much rather have someone who doesn't have pronouns in their bio and who would directly but lovingly state that they don't agree with their lifestyle choices, but knows that they are a human being, and are going to treat them that way, going to treat them as their neighbor and bring them groceries. That they would much rather have that situation, someone who disagrees with them but doing something practical and beneficial for them, rather than having a bunch of randos on the internet putting words in their social media bios.
Yeah. Well, and on that point, I think that, so let's say this here, because I think it'll probably apply to some of the other comments we look at. But one of the things I think that is really good that comes from conversations like this is that what we can say is like, the church honestly has a really good, Christians individually, the church in general, has a really good opportunity. It always has had a good opportunity. Sometimes we don't do a great job at it. We have another opportunity now to say, very openly, I don't agree with you because of of what God has is firmly put in place as far as creation. But I believe that Jesus, what Jesus says and his commands to his people, which I am one of, to take care of you, to provide for you, to love you. And we have an opportunity to, with our actions, demonstrate that, one, maybe the preconceived notions of what people believe of Christians aren't accurate, as well as that some sort of virtue signaling means zero and actual actions are what the hands and feet of Jesus actually look like. And I think the church has a real opportunity, and I think some churches are going to need to be prodded a bit more than others, to say, hey, what are you doing? Like, as a believer, you're supposed to be doing good works. You're supposed to be doing something, and this would be what our opportunity to do something would be, and really parse that out, right? In our discipleship making, in really our small groups, and the things that churches do to build up believers and encourage them and teach them, we have a real opportunity to say, what does this look like practically right now for us? Right? Like, let's forget the whole, it's a hill I will die on. I really don't think that Christians should virtue signal, put pronouns in the Bible. I think it's because of the affirmation that the trans community themselves have said is what that means. That when we do that, it's just like this frivolous thing where you actually have an opportunity to be the hands and feet, turn off the stupid Netflix and go do something. And I think that's where the whole love thing comes in. It goes like, what are you actually doing? Like, I don't do this because I think it's stupid. I know a lot of people do it. I don't put Happy Mother's Day to my mom with a picture of her on Facebook, because what does that even mean? Nothing. Right? I purposely this weekend took time out to go do something with her. She don't care about no stupid post on Facebook where we were, I was 11. Who cares? I went and did something. And I think that's an example of not, it's a humble brag. It didn't come off right. But the idea is that, doing
It's
something
all right,
online.
Michael. You already have your reward now.
Thank you. I haven't. The idea is like, go do something, guys. I mean, don't just like, I don't know. I just think we're missing a huge opportunity arguing about something that's not, like, I think it's important to make that distinction, but like, how many people are arguing to put them in there and aren't actually doing anything? You wouldn't go get anything. Anyway, I'm sorry, off my soapbox. Next comment here, because a lot of these, again, don't go find these people and be buttheads to them. Here's the other one. Putting pronouns in your bio is a way of letting other people know what your pronouns are. Stop demonizing something that's perfectly okay. There's not a single verse in the Bible that says being transgender or identity by other pronouns is a sin. At this point, you guys, I forgot that I put this in here. At this point, you guys are just picking and choosing what you want to hate, and it shows so much for loving faith and a loving God. I think this person probably doesn't follow us. There really is no hate quite like Christian love. Shake my head. So there's some things here that I want to address. I did pick this purposefully. This is, I think, what you're going to come up against whenever like you say that, I don't do this or that because of what it portrays, right? Automatically apparent. I don't know for sure. I'm pretty sure this person doesn't follow us, but the idea here is that one, they're saying there's no Bible verse saying being transgender or identifying any other ways as sin, which we could argue that. I've made videos on that. But the idea that I want to portray in this, I think the reason I picked this is that love thing again. Like there's this idea that if you don't do this thing, then you're automatically unloving. Now, to that point, I think as Christians, you're going to have to grow a little bit of a backbone. Okay. A little bit of a thick skin, be able to be firm, but gentle, right? It took a while for me to learn that, just to be completely honest with you, to be able to be firm in what I'm saying. And whenever I'm confronted with stuff like that, but also gentle in my reply on why I do or do not do those things. But again, I think that comes with, again, discipleship in church, sanctification, that sort of things. But again, that was just another example. I don't know if you have any reply to that. I picked that again because of that whole love thing. Automatically, the assumption was, if you don't do this, you don't love these people. And that was a very common theme in the comments of this particular meme. You have anything before we go to the next one?
I think that love has been so decontextualized and this isn't a word, but depracticalized. Like we're saying, the practical aspect of it has been taken out.
Yeah.
And let's just, I don't know, this may be a bad example, but there is I heard this, it's actually a joke. But I think it speaks well. So, these people are driving down the road and pass by this guy who's standing on the corner of the street holding up a sign saying, "The end is near, turn around now." And so they roll down their windows and yell at him and, "Get off the street, you religious nut." And they speed around the corner and go crashing off the broken bridge down into the river. The guy was, the end is near, turn around now. And they go over the bridge. They perceived what that guy was doing in a hateful manner and in a hateful way. In the same way, if there's this cliff that people are running and jumping off of, and they may be having a great time falling through the air, getting that free falling, zero, or that the G-force experience. But like maybe you can see farther than they can and be like, you're going to hit the ground at some point. And so I'm going to stand here and be like, you don't need to jump off this cliff. And they're like, why are you trying to tell me what to do? Why are you trying to tell me how to live my life? Me jumping off this cliff doesn't hurt you. It doesn't affect anybody else. I'm my own person. If I choose to jump off this cliff, then so be it. I don't see anything wrong with it. But you can be like, I know what the end result is. And then they're like, I don't believe you. The trip down is the trip through the air down to the ground is going to be worth it. I'll land fine. Whatever excuse and reasoning that you want to give. But from the perspective of the person that you are trying to help, they are not going to perceive that as love. with dealing with kids, like a child who does not understand the consequences of something, are going to interpret the guidelines that you are trying to implement as being hate. You know, you hate me. Why don't you love me? You're such a horrible parent. Why don't you want me to do this? Why don't you want me to experience that? And you're like, I'm trying to help prevent you from facing the consequences of this. And granted, there somebody who is in this type of situation, and somebody who's putting pronouns in their bios, or the people that they're trying to support, there may not be any kind of, direct, vis-a-vis consequence that happens in this life. But as Christians, we are looking into the eternal implications of things. We're looking past the transiency of this life and of immediate pleasure, and even looking beyond personal identity in this life, because ultimately our Christian approach to this is to safeguard our biblical, practical, traditional, conservative way, without trying to politicize it, way of understanding gender, sexuality, so on and so forth. But ultimately, even that itself is not the gospel. The gospel is ultimately is not who are you. The gospel is who is Jesus, and what does his identity and his work mean for your life. And a part of his identity, or actually the central aspects of his identity, is that he is King, Lord, and God. And there are things that he has set up that has eternal implications. Whatever those eternal implications may be, they do have eternal implications. And so ultimately, your identity that has to do with sex, gender, attraction, whether it is heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual, hide all the pots in the kitchen, whatever it may be, that the ultimate identity is who you are in Christ and who you are going to be eternally. And then once you put that into perspective, you can then work backwards and say, okay, what does my eternal identity in Christ have to do with my life now? What implications can I draw from the future into the present? A lot of times the arguments that I hear begin with this life and work forwards. And the primary focus is on this life. It does matter, but we have to view this life through the lens of the next.
Yeah. Well, and to piggyback off that, so we're not going to get to any more comments because I want to make sure we respect the time within this hour here. But I think I do want to touch on something you said there that I think is really important. So the whole topic, the whole title of the video is should Christians use pronouns in their interactions, specifically talking about pronouns in the bio of your either your email at work or your email in general or social media, all that sort of online sort of thing, because that's primarily where it's going to touch you first. And I think what you said there was really helpful in this regard, right? So Christians are going to have to come up to the point where they say, if putting those in my email or bio means I'm sending the message that I'm affirming this sort of thing, first you're going to have to determine if that's something that you're willing to do. And that's just a real call, right? That's just something you're really going to have to decide. How far am I willing to push this? And it goes back to your whole, your talking about Paul and the meat and all that sort of stuff. And then when you just touch on identity there, I think that gives us a real opportunity. There's a two-pronged thing here. I think this really gives us as believers an opportunity to do. One, show people by our actions, by what Jesus has done in our life, grace and mercy to people that don't know him yet. But more importantly, with what you were saying, is that when those conversations come up and you act in a way that's not expected, right? In a way of grace and mercy and love, right? By your actions, not because you did some stupid thing in your bio, but your actual actions, you are going to have the opportunity to speak the gospel to people in a way that says, the reason the reason I do this, even though I disagree with you, even though all of this, the reason my heart and mind are being and have been transformed, and just preach the gospel. And what I mean by this, I think we get distracted so much. I see this a lot in my past, especially. I see this a lot in witnessing to people, just other people witnessing, is that we're like, you have to change this first. I'm more concerned about just preaching the gospel to you, you knowing who Jesus is, and then letting that transform your life, right? If you know, I am confident that if the Holy Spirit opens your eyes to know who Jesus Christ is, there is going to be a ripple effect in your life of change. That might be immediate. That might be slower. I don't know what that looks different from everybody I know. It's not the same, but there is a change in their life in which there are people that our friend Jonathan, right? He has a video up. I shared it. I'll probably put it in the description of this video too, where his church interviewed somebody that came out of transgenderism because their heart and mind were redeemed by Jesus. And that's what changed it. That's what changed their whole mentality, was knowing who Jesus was. So when it comes to that identity thing, that's key. Where does my identity come? My identity comes from Jesus Christ. And I'm confident that if you know who Jesus is, that's who I want you to know. Like all of this other stuff, this disagreement, this me not wanting to do this or whatever, like at the end of the day, as believers, we are supposed to go out and tell people about Jesus, knowing that he transformed you. He can transform anybody, right? I mean, he can get a hold of anybody. So our job is to go and tell them about who Jesus is, knowing that he'll transform their life, and doing that in a way that's really active. Right. Again, I can't get past that. Like we are to do good works. We are to live out the gospel in front of people, which means that, yeah, you may disagree with somebody, but your actions should demonstrate, Matt, you may have this verse memorized. You're a lot better at memorizing. My brain's terrible, but I think it's Peter that says that if somebody does bring an accusation against you, it's going to be frivolous because your life demonstrates that, the way you've lived faithfully demonstrates that wouldn't even be true anyway. And we're supposed to live that way. That if somebody says you're in this case, you're transphobic or you're whatever, that your life demonstrates that, no, you're not. Like you're the one that is telling everyone else not to say derogatory things. You're the one that's, giving your time, energy, and effort to help someone. So be that person, right? I mean, to say that, no, I don't affirm what you're doing. In fact, I have a lot of reasons that I would love to talk to you about where Jesus can change your life. But that doesn't mean that I'm hateful towards you, or I use demeaning terms towards you, or I shove you out of every aspect. Like that's not what that means. It means I live the gospel out in front of you. And then when given the opportunity, I speak the gospel to you. I tell you about, like, why am I different? Hopefully that shows. And when it does show, I can tell you about who Jesus is and what he's done in my life. And that was the whole point of the end part of that description. Like, guys, if we're not honest about what God has done in our lives, like our failings, our shortcomings, no, I mean, no one's going to care. Like, what does Jesus do? What's he even do in anyone's life? Well, he transformed my life, and I think he can transform yours. So anyway, any ending thoughts here as we kind of tie this up a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw this out here at the end of the video, since people are less likely to to watch these last few minutes. They probably
just going to throw a grenade. Is that what you're
not a bad grenade. It's just I'm going to open up the academic aspect of me, and just to show anyone who may still be watching or is rewatching up to this point, like how complicated and also how trivial this is. Just real quick. So most of the pronouns that we're referring to in the English speaking world, he, him, his, he, or she, her, hers, z, zim, ziz, so on and so forth. Mostly that is either in the nominative and in the objective and possessive cases in the English. Okay. Well, I don't know how it is practically in a lot of these other languages, but just to show you how trivial pronouns really are, when you look even to the biblical languages, in Hebrew, even the even like the third person reference, like the way that we would say they have feminine and masculine, and the way that we say you all, it has feminine and masculine. Actually, even in Hebrew, it's the singular with has feminine and masculine. So in this ancient Hebrew, and probably even to a certain extent in modern Hebrew, you have these arbitrary rules that have just developed over time that plays into the pronouns that really have no impact on reality, because you can reference a group of mixed genders by using the masculine third person plural referent, not because you're trying to insinuate that the crowd is all men, but it's just the way that things are. In Greek, it gets a little bit more interesting. In Greek, not only is there masculine and feminine, but there's also neuter. Neuter is auta. Masculine is autos, feminine autes. In neuter, it's auta, which is without the s sound at the end. Just because something is referenced as neuter doesn't mean that in reality it doesn't actually have a gender. I'm thinking even of like in German. If I wanted to say your cat, I would say deine Katze, because for whatever reason, Katze is a feminine word. Well, if I wanted to say your dog, I would say deinen Hund. And I'm saying the same thing, but it's just like these weird grammatical rules. Like your dog could be a female dog, but I'm still going to reference it in the masculine insinuation. Like I don't know what these. I don't even know what modern German is doing in pronouns. I'm just trying to learn it just so I can read old dead theologians and such. But like I don't know what they're going to do in the present whenever these things. I mean, it would be so complicated in a lot of these other languages where all of these finest masculine, feminine, neuter, and all the parts of grammar. I mean, it'll just be a mess if we begin to find, pick, and solidify the way that we're referencing individuals and groups of people. And it just goes back to how asinine and arbitrary this whole deal about pronouns. Like it really doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't do anything. Yeah, I mean, everybody may rally together and like, oh yeah, it's a cause and we support them. But I mean, you're still sitting on your couch holding a device. Like it's not doing anything that's impacting people's lives. Like if you're going to do something, do something.
Gotcha. Okay. You see, this is interesting because you know the different languages, and I'm just like, I can barely speak English. So that was helpful there for the rest of us as far as how that goes. All right, guys. Well, we are going to tie this up because we were right at an hour. So if you've made it this far, we appreciate it greatly. If you found this helpful, as always, make sure you click the thumbs up button, give some love there. Or if you hate it, you can do the thumbs down, and nobody but me will see it, and I'll just cry in my closet by myself, and you can feel better about yourself. And if hopefully what we've done is at the very least kind of clarified, give you something to think about as far as like, what does this look like? And hopefully what it's come down to is that if we're believers, our goal shouldn't be some sort of virtue signal, is especially one that communicates something that the Bible doesn't, but rather a life lived out by a changed heart and mind with the gospel, with the intent of bringing forth the gospel into people's lives in real ways that demonstrate, hey, let me tell you about what God saved me from, and just putting that out there, saying, hey, he can do the same for you. So that would be the hope as believers, that we're going out there living the gospel out, hands, feet of Jesus, and that we're doing so in a way that even if we disagree with people, which you're going to have to do, right? You're not going to be able to get away from that. But you're doing it in a way of grace and mercy and love toward those, declaring the gospel to them. So guys, thank you for watching, following, all the things that you do. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you next Monday. See you then.